Ross Perot died today at the age of 89. The self-made billionaire ran for president in 1992 and 1996. He sat down with C-SPAN in March of 1992, just before officially launching his campaign.
I mean, do you see yourself sitting in the White House and you say, all right, we've got an issue here, and
well, it's an extension of the old fireside chat, but the technology has changed so completely that you can now get a response from the owners. The people in Congress. Congress now is totally dominated by lobbyists. I want Congress totally dominated by the people in their congressional district. The reason, now Congress is not bad, but the reason they're dominated by lobbyists is that television time for your next election costs so much. And these are the boys who are running up and down the halls all day, every day. You and I could take a 5-minute walk right now, and we'd both be laughing in 5 minutes at what we see. Go to the Ways and Means Committee where they're working on the new tax bill. You know, you could get killed in the rush. And none of it has anything to do with a good tax bill for the American people. All of it has to do with putting another patch on that old inner tube for a special interest. See? Now, so you explain an issue. Here are our priorities. Number one, you've got to keep the job base intact. You don't want to let it crumble while you're fixing everything else, because your tax base is a function of how many people are working. And one of the things that are of greatest concern to the American people is that we're losing jobs in this country. You're going to have to work on that problem on an industry-by-industry basis. You're going to then have to have a plan, company by company, on the big companies in trouble. You're going to have to bring in people who are the most knowledgeable people in each of these industries. Bring these people in overnight, put them to work immediately, and come up with rough, crude plans first. Keep everybody informed as you do it. Come down with good plans. This is what our successful international competitors are doing. What we do in our country is get up every morning and break businesses' legs and then wonder why the job base is deteriorating. Now, that's only part of the reason. But there is a lot of work to be done to stabilize the job base, turn it around, and there can only be one goal. There's only one way to protect the job base, and that is to have the words "Made in the USA," the world standard of excellence. Each of our companies must make the finest products in the world. Can we? Yes. No question. Now, when? Not until we start. When do we start? The first day, because that's the highest priority. You do not want to have the music stop as far as the U.S. economy. It has been pillaged and plundered for the last 12 years. Had $1 trillion in 1980 in debt. Now we've got $4 trillion and nothing to show for it.
If you had an electronic town hall and you took a vote on, would you abide by the wishes of the people under all circumstances?
It's their country.
All right, I'll give you an example. Let's say you took a poll and you said, should we segregate or integrate? And they came back and said segregate. What would you do then?
It's unconstitutional. I'd go back. Well, you wouldn't take that because that's not, first off, you see, if they brought that up, I'd say, wait a minute, for God's sakes. We are imploding economically. Now, you know, just because some guy in white sheets comes up and wants me to put that in the town hall, I'd say, hold your breath, sucker, because the last thing we need now is to put stress in the melting pot. Forget it. We're not going to turn the clock back. Now, you know, so if you, fella, want to do that, go do it on your own. But we've got a patient here on the operating table, and we've got to fix the most critical problem. And you're bringing up an old issue that is on the way to being fixed, but not there. We're not going back to that. It's unconstitutional. And let's not have stray bullets. You know, that somebody could come in and say, what about the gray owl? Let's take that first. Well, the environment, you know, that's a piece of the endangered species list. But compared to keeping the financial pump going, you can't discuss it, because if the financial pump breaks, you don't have any money to take care of the gray owl. And everybody understands that. First things first, you work your way down the list. So you got to get your companies turned around. You got to stop spending beyond your means. You get a new Graham-Rudman with no loopholes in it. You've got to have a new tax system fast, because the current tax system is corrupt and flawed. And it's got to be, number one, it's got to be fair. Number 1A, it's got to raise the money. And number 2, it should be paperless for most of the people. Then, just to get everybody's head straight about who works for whom, right away, I'd like to get a law passed that only the people can give Congress and the White House a pay raise. Because if they're happy with the performance, maybe you can get a pay raise. If Congress thinks they deserve one, fine. But giving themselves a 23% pay raise during the Tax and Budget Summit, no. So get that straight. Then change the voting day to Saturday and Sunday. Get away from Tuesday. Let more people vote. Just a whole series of little house cleaning things that are simple common sense that nobody, I'm just fascinated, nobody will even say, well, no, we can't vote on Saturday and Sunday. Everybody knows that's a good idea. Stop exit polling. Stop releasing data from East Coast polls until Hawaii is closed. Little simple things to clean up the system. Shorten the time for elections.
Can you do that without breaking the First Amendment?
What's that?
Can you stop a network, say, from doing exit polling under the First Amendment? In other words, can you pass a law that says you can't exit poll?
Probably have to get about 30 lawyers on that one. But you can understand the inequity of it because it really impacts what happens out west. So my thought is we sit down with everybody concerned, starting with the press, because they would be the ones most concerned about it, say, look, this is really damaging the election process. Now we want the right. I said, okay, fine, guys. It's really not fair. Yeah, but it's something we want to do. You know, gives us sound bites and we can charge more for commercials. I said, you just lost me. Now, compared to having a fair election, you guys are in trouble. So then you go to the people, say, all right, we got a problem here. Now, we can amend this dang Constitution if we have to, but we've got to have fair elections. And exit polling really distorts what happens across the country. The American people say, I'll leave it the way it is, we don't care. Well, fine. Then I'm a happy man. The owners have spoken, right? Terrific.
What about in a military situation? I don't mean to keep giving these hypotheticals, but
no, that's a good one.
Let's say that you have an intelligence organization that tells you we've got a serious threat overseas.
Well, that would be a change. I mean, nice assumption. Normally, they didn't know the Berlin Wall was going to fall till it fell. Didn't know Gorbachev was going to have a coup. So I'm glad you got that one cleaned up for me.
Let's say you have this special.
They're on top of it for once. Okay.
They're on top of it. They tell you it's a threat. You'd go to the public and say, should we bomb Iraq? And the public comes back and says no.
All right. This is not a situation where we're being attacked, the one you're defining. This is a situation where we are going to war. Okay? And this is a situation where we have all the time in the world to go to war. We decided that we would take 5 or 6 months to get ready to go to war, right? Well, certainly you should discuss that with the American people over the town hall because their sons and daughters fight that war, right? Now, they should understand and why we're going to war. Now, let's take the example you gave me. It was 4 months before the White House could figure out why we were doing it. One time it was jobs, next time it was oil. Finally, they got it together, and it was had to get rid of nuclear, chemical, bacteriological, and Hussein. Well, guess what we've still got? Nuclear, chemical, bacteriological, and Hussein. Didn't accomplish any objective. Say, but we recovered Kuwait for the Emir. Now, if I knock on your door and say, I'd like to borrow your son, go to the Middle East, so that this dude with 70 wives, who's got a minister for sex to find him a virgin every Thursday night, can have his throne back, you'd probably hit me right in the mouth. I said, well, but you know, strategically it's important, so on and so forth. Finally talk you into it. But see, the point is, what were we trying? We had to recover Kuwait. Only in America, after we had troops on the ground in the Middle East, would we let Assad of Syria, who killed 243 Marines in Beirut and blew up Pan Am 103, cement his hold over a big chunk of Lebanon. Now, if you don't let a guy take a country, why do you let him take a country? It's just simple. We always have to have a bad boy of choice. This is what happens when you've got this imperial leadership we've got. We made Noriega what he was. He was the CIA's main man in Central America. You know who was down there talking to him and on and on and on and on and on. Now, suddenly he got out of line. Then we got to deal with the Panamanian major to capture him. Then we couldn't get our act together to have a special forces team, which was set up to go pick him up, wandered 400 yards and pick him up where there was no risk at all. And the major was killed, and we were embarrassed, and then we had to go take Panama, so on and so forth. And we replaced him with another drug dealer as president. And now he's costing us, you know, he's down there living well in his cell, and who knows where that one will go. Then we spent 10 years creating Saddam Hussein. If you look at the direct involvement, there's a whole litany now that's being printed about how we made this man who he is today. And our current president's fingerprints are over it, all over it from 1982 on, in direct involvement in getting him money, getting him weapons, getting him and all the way down to a few months before the war, trying to get people to leave him alone and let him do what he wanted to do. And then, with written instructions, we sent April Glaspie, the ambassador, in to see him on July the 25th to tell him we would not become involved with his border dispute in Kuwait, and basically saying, if you want to take that northern part, you can. And then he took the whole thing. Then we got our feelings hurt. Then we got to worry about Arab oil. Then the Saudis got all upset and nervous that he was coming to Saudi Arabia. And then it was all ego trips and insecurity, and we tried to turn it into the Super Bowl of wars, where the American people got to see smart bombs go down air shafts, never got to see a guy cut to pieces in the desert. Only in America would you have a war, get it over with, and have all the heroes either be generals or politicians. Now, if you can show me Sergeant York or Audie Murphy in that war, I'd like to meet him. And war is fought by enlisted men, not by politicians. Now, so I'm just bringing down to, I know what war is. I've been really, really close to war most of my adult life. I know what these guys look like all blown to pieces, close up. I know what it's like for their widows and for their kids, and so on and so on and so forth. I know what it's like for guys to come back home from Vietnam and nobody to care about them and spit on them after they spent years over there fighting. Now then, you just don't throw people into war because your bad boy of choice in the Middle East that you spent 10 years creating has embarrassed you. So you bet I'd talk to the American people about it, and you bet we'd have a big debate about it. Now in the meantime, go ahead, start to build up, get everything in place, so on and so forth. But in turn, before you blow the whistle, you want to make sure of the one lesson that we should have learned from Vietnam if we didn't learn anything else. Before you send one person on a battlefield, you first commit the nation, and then you commit the troops. See, for Congress to duck this, irresponsible. Get the American people in the middle of it, absolutely.
We're out of time. Last question to you. You know how much activity there is out there in the country within these states. What's your guess as to whether or not the 50 states will be signed up and whether or not you'll get in?
There is far more activity than I ever thought there would be. I never thought there would be activity in 50 states. I thought really there wouldn't be much activity, and then I thought it would go away in a few days. But at this point in time, it seems to continue to be growing, and I don't think it has anything to do with me. I think it has everything to do with people's concerns about where we are and where we're going. So the people are deeply concerned about, is the country going to continue to grow and prosper, or are we in decline? Now, all the polls and things you've seen confirm that. I believe that's all driven by this. Has nothing to do with me.
Your guess, though, in or out?
In or out?
You think you'll be in it or out of it when it's all over?
It's too early to tell.
Some time frame on when what's the date when you have to make a decision?
Well, let's assume they don't get it done in Texas. It's over. May the 6th, it's over. I can go back to work.
And it has to be 50 states?
Excuse me, no. Texas is May the 6th.
Let's assume,
yes.
I'm
saying that's my deal with the American people. Register me in 50 states. I'll drop everything. I will run as your servant. I won't belong to anybody but you if you want me. And as I've said many, many times, if along the way you find somebody you're more fascinated with, take him. I'll be glad to go back to work.
And in Texas, they have to have 54,000 signatures by May 6th?
That's my understanding.
And they can't have voted in either one of the primaries?
That's right.
Ross Perot, we're out of time. Thank you. We'll, I assume, pick up from where we are here at some future time.
Well, we'll see where it goes.
Following this interview, Ross Perot officially launched his 1992 campaign for president. He ran a second time in 1996, coming in third both times. Ross Perot died today at the age of 89.
Now, the legacy of two-time presidential candidate Ross Perot, who passed away of leukemia today at his home in Dallas. We begin with a look back at the anti-establishment, self-made Texas billionaire.
We want to close on our theme song. Let's hit it, Ed.
We're crazy.
An early disruptor, Ross Perot was a tech entrepreneur turned self-made billionaire turned the most successful third-party candidate in modern American political history. Born in Depression-era Texas, Perot went on to serve in the Navy before getting a job as a salesman with IBM. The scrappy businessman eventually sold his first company, Electronic Data Systems, to General Motors for $2.5 billion.
We've got to rebuild our great country. We've got to make our country the envy of the world again. And I can't sleep until the words "Made in the USA" once again become the world standard correctly.
But Perot is best known for his insurgent third-party candidacy in the 1992 presidential election against President George H.W. Bush and Democratic challenger Bill Clinton.
I was not put on the ballot by either of the two parties. This is a movement that came from the people.
Mixing brashness with charm, the political outsider pitched himself as a fighter for everyday Americans.
The party's over, and it's time for the cleanup crew.
And he lambasted lawmakers in Washington as out of touch, paramount being President Bush.
I think it's experience at this level.
Well, they've got a point. I don't have any experience in running up a $4 trillion debt.
Perot kept up his attacks, most of them squarely on Mr. Bush, in the '92 presidential debates, moderated by the NewsHour's Jim Lehrer.
Free and fair trade is the answer, not protection.
While President Bush pushed free trade deals like NAFTA, Perot pushed back.
We have got to stop sending jobs overseas. There will be a giant sucking sound going south. So if the people send me to Washington, the first thing I'll do is study that 2,000-page agreement and make sure it's a two-way street. Since we're dealing with voodoo economics, a great young lady from Louisiana sent me this voodoo stick.
Perot's non-traditional campaign included 30-minute TV infomercials on issues like the national deficit, complete with homemade charts. The programs drew more than 16 million viewers.
Just this year, we ran up $341 billion in new debt. And as we discussed the other night, that's our legislators and our president trying to buy our vote this year with what used to be our money. We're not that dumb.
In the end, 19.7 million Americans voted for Perot in the 1992 election. Republicans forever blamed him for Clinton's win, claiming he siphoned votes from Bush. But later analysis undercut that. Perot went on to run in the 1996 presidential election before dropping out. A philanthropist in his later years, Perot is survived by his wife Margot, 5 children, and 16 grandchildren. Ross Perot was the best-performing third-party presidential candidate since Teddy Roosevelt in 1912. Some perspective now on his life and legacy from a man who knew Perot for decades, moderated 2 of his presidential debates, and is a very familiar face to our viewers. I'm so pleased to welcome back NewsHour co-founder Jim Lehrer. Welcome back to this program.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you.
Very well. So I knew Ross Perot after he became famous. He was running for president, successful businessman. But you knew him long before that. How did you get to know him?
Well, I met him in Dallas. He was a computer guy who had an idea about the way to computerize federal medical systems, and he created this incredible company, and he made millions and millions of dollars. Because he had been a naval officer and I had been a Marine officer at the same time, there was some overlap. Most of the people who went to work for him were former Navy officers and Marine officers. So anyhow, I met him that way, and then somebody said, you know, you ought to get to know Ross Perot. You're going to hear about him a lot in the future. So I made an appointment, went over and see him, and he and I hit it off. And we became, there was already a bond there, that military thing that is always there. But at any rate, I stayed with him until I left to come to Washington. He had already shown that when he had millions and millions of dollars, he wanted to use it to help other people. He had already shown that he was a guy who was not taken with himself. He was taken with his ideas, but he was not the standard kind of showboat, you know, Texas millionaire kind of guy. He was a guy who had millions of dollars and he wanted to use it for good things.
What was he like as a person?
Well, he was funny. He was straight. He was authentic. The Ross Perot that you sit around a table and talk to was the same guy who was in a debate stage many years later as a candidate for president of the United States. He always seemed to feel comfortable with himself. He was not an ideologue. He didn't wake up every morning and say, well, I'm a conservative, so I got to believe, oh, I'm a liberal. No, but he decided every day, I'm Ross Perot, and here's what I believe. And it was the foundation and the motivation for everything he did in public life, politics and other things as well.
Were you surprised when he said he was going to run for president? He brought this idea about we're going to get government spending down, we've got to tackle this deficit.
You know, I thought about that today, and that very question. Because I remember now, and I hope I'm not basing this on what I hoped my feelings were then. I thought. I felt that makes sense for this guy. In other words, my feelings about him were all positive. We were friends, not personal friends, professional friends. And I felt I admired him because I liked what he had done. He had supported the military during the Vietnam War. He wasn't in favor of the war necessarily. He didn't have a political position on it, but he supported the people who fought in the war, and he spent a lot of his money taking care of POW families and all that sort of stuff. But when he announced for president, I thought, oh, yeah, Ross Perot running for president. And then, of course, we did a lot of interviews with him on the NewsHour, right. And I saw him a lot during all that stuff, and he just confirmed. It made me a little bit proud, you know, to have known him and know that, hey, yeah. And I kept telling people, pay attention to this guy. He's not going to just come and go. And he did better as an independent candidate. Everybody knows how hard it is to run for president as independent. He ended up getting, as we said, over, 19-some million votes for president. But Jim, you did moderate those two debates in 1992 with him, with then President George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. Tell us some memories of that. Well, the biggest memory was the major debate I did was at Michigan State University, and it was a 90-minute debate. But the debate commission had negotiated with the candidates that the first 45 minutes, for the first time, would be a single moderator, and it would be wide open in terms of rules and all of that. And this was a big deal. So once the debate started, and then in the second 45, they're going to bring in 3 panelists. We do the old-fashioned way, which is the way these debates used to be. But at any rate, things started, and I got just the way, it wasn't me. I mean, I asked the questions, but George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton got into it about Clinton's record in Arkansas. They went back and forth. And Perot, over here on the right, didn't get to say anything. He kept looking at me. I knew he was going to say something, and this whole debate could go right up into smoke. At any rate, he finally said,
"Is there an equal time rule here tonight?"
Yes.
Or do you just keep lunging in at will? I thought we were going to have equal time, but maybe I just have to interrupt the other two. Is that the way it works this turn?
No, Mr. Perot, you're doing fine. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Whatever you want to say it.
He looked at me, and he was ready to go, and I looked at him, and he heard me, and he hushed. And he was terrific at the debate. If he had played games in that debate, it would have hurt him. And from my point of view, and I was looking at it from my point of view as well, but also from the viewer's point of view, it could have been a disaster, and it wasn't, because he understood. He understood what he needed to do.
I mean, you've told us so much about his life. What do you think his legacy is? I mean, we've talked about most successful independent candidate since Teddy Roosevelt.
The reason he was successful is he had 2 things going for him that sound familiar in the current situation, but they're not quite that familiar. He had ideas that were not driven by ideology. For instance, he was pro-choice. He was for gun control, as most real military people are who know about guns. But at the same time, he was very conservative about the military, about budgets and all that. He did welfare and all of that. So as I say, he made his own thing. But what he had, and he was able to explain what he believed and why he believed it. But he had that additional thing was he had resources. He made it. He spent $68 million of his own money. There was nothing about small donors. There were no donors, just Ross Perot. And he spent huge amounts of money, and he got and for these things that he did, these 30-minute infomercials he used you could have all the Ross Perot positives, but without the resources, it's not going to work. That's the legacy of the 2 things that he had going for him, and anybody wants to write the lessons for the future, that's it.
Scrappy. That's the word we think of with him. Jim Lehrer, thank you very much for coming back to talk about Ross Perot.